Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to come here and to talk to DFA and its associates. Glad that DFA is moving forward, and I got a badge here. I'll take this back with me, and you'll be the symbol for we should get badges in Berkeley. Yes, and it's great it's an honor to be on the panel with Amy, who's been, as you will, I think, hear, has been a very important figure in developing the program for the $48 fix, which you'll hear about, I think. And Delaine, Eastin, it's really an honor to be on the panel with you. You have obviously been fighting for education since you were born, fighting for your own education and then for others. And I'd like to actually begin by saying that I have been a faculty person, teacher, instructor, Berkeley for 40 years. And as I reflect on those 40 years, when I go into my classes today, in some ways, nothing has changed. Still have those wonderful students who I believe are sort of a joy and a privilege to teach. There's actually one here today, an ex-student, and it's still that remarkable ability of students, at least at Berkeley, but I think you see generally, to participate, no matter how many students there are, they will participate, discipline and fashion, recognize one another, laugh at each other's jokes in a crowd of, even 100, 200 students. They are just wonderful people to teach. So there is some way things just haven't changed, but things actually in some ways have actually got better. When I look out to the students, they look much more diverse than they were 40 years ago. And they are diverse in every way, in color, in background, in class background. And we have now, in my class are about 60% transfer students. There were very few transfer students 40 years ago. So there is an enormous diversity, and diversity in age. There are people who are even as old as I am in the class. And it's really fun to teach and challenging to teach these students. So that's a real positive. But I don't have to tell you there are some negatives. The class now is not 50 students, it's 200 students. In the old days, there were teaching assistants who took sections of the size of 15. Now their section sizes are 20. So that means they got 40 rather than 30 students. Still pretty good for a public university. And there is another issue. The other issue, if you broaden access, and as you know, the New York Times has this access index, and it's the 5 top places in that access index, based in part on Pell Grants. It goes to the campuses of the University of California. Davis, I don't remember, is 3rd or 4th on the list. Irvine is top. Berkeley is about 7th or 8th. But basically, the University of California does extremely well in terms of access. But what we don't talk enough about is inclusion. What does it mean to bring people from very different backgrounds together into the same classroom? What does it mean to bring people who come from community colleges, never experienced the big university? What does it mean to actually have people who are sometimes almost barely literate alongside people with enormous cultural capital? What does it mean to have students who are supporting their families, are working 30, 40 hours a week sometimes, alongside those whose parents can afford to fund their education and their existence? Particularly in the light of, and this of course is a big change, when I was teaching in 1976, did you know how much the fees were then? 125. They were a little bit more. They were about $600 in those days. Today they are $13,000. So, and it is true the University of California has a very progressive policy. So families that earn less than $80,000 don't pay any fees. But still, this is a big issue. An even bigger issue, of course, is the cost of living, particularly in a place like Berkeley. Yes. So what I do see increasingly is an incredible amount of anxiety floating around among students. And we have this disability, the DSP program, the student program, and that actually brings students who are actually suffering from all sorts of anxiety, and their numbers in that program have increased, and in my class perhaps 20% even are those who have to have some sort of accommodation because of various disabilities that they may have. So yes, so this free-floating anxiety is another feature of teaching today. I could go on what it's like to be on the sort of what we used to call the chalk face. I guess we now call it the PowerPoint face. I could go on, but I want to talk for the rest of my 15 minutes. I'd like to talk about what I believe to be the 4 crises that lie behind the changes that are going on in the university. The 4 crises are a fiscal crisis, a governance crisis, an identity crisis, and a legitimation crisis. And if that sounds like sociology to you, it is. And by the way, sociologists only think in 4s. That's how you make a career in sociology, having a 2x2 table. But I will not subject you to my 2x2 tables. All right. Fiscal crisis. Well, we know the story. Let me give you some figures of the declining state investment. First, the University of California share of the state budget in the last 50 years has fallen from 8% of the state budget to 2.5% of the state budget. The last 30 years, we got a 50% drop in funding the UC system when we adjust for inflation. Third, we have a falling contribution of the state budget at UC campus from 50% of the UC campus to 13% of the UC campus budget. I mean the Berkeley campus I'm talking about there. I don't know the figures for other campuses. So it's fallen from 50% of the budget to 13%. And as we know, California ranks near the bottom of all states in the percentage of high school leavers who attend 4-year colleges. I think it's about the 47th position. So we actually are producing relatively few places in the university system. Our students from high school cannot find places here. So why is this happening? Why this diminution of state funding? There are different arguments of how it all began. One argument is that actually the cost of the university increased, and so the university itself chose to actually introduce fees, and the state legislature responded by reducing funding. Other people blame the state legislature for reducing state funding, and therefore the university had to respond with higher fees. It's very difficult to disentangle what caused what, but what we do know, we're in a spiral. We're in a spiral, and sometimes the legislature and the regents, and we're in a business at this point, so freezes the fees, but still, in the end, the fees gradually go up. We haven't heard a story yet of fees falling. Yeah, not yet. So this fiscal crisis. So what happens? Well, the university, here is no exception. Berkeley, all my examples are from Berkeley. We become obsessed with revenues. We'll do anything to get more revenues. Revenues come from donors. They come from industrial pharmaceutical companies like Novartis, or not so long ago we had an investment of $500 million from BP that suddenly evaporated when BP was in trouble. So we were left carrying the bag. And so often happens with these investments, and Chris Newfield has written a book that focuses largely on this, that many of the privatization projects in the end cost the university many more. So if you have a donor who gives you a building, you've got to maintain the building. You probably have to pay the extra cost that the building will require, even just in the very construction. So privatization often actually leads not to cheapening, but to increasing costs. Yeah. And one of the strategies is to increase the efficiency of the university. We had something called Operation Excellence on our campus. Well, as some of you may know, that turned out to be a rather problematic operation and enormously increased costs in a project that was called as Campus Shared Services. So privatization, if not done intelligently, can be extremely problematic. So this revenue searching continues, all sorts of new programs, MA programs, anything to get revenue is of the order today. On the one side, and then there is cost cutting. There are all sorts of ways in which there is cost cutting, not least outsourcing of low-paid workers, but also, very importantly, the increased employment of lecturers. And the university has basically, Berkeley, there has been a freezing of the numbers of ladder faculty, around 1,300, has stayed the same for the last 40 years. And, but the increased number of students have been catered to by increasing numbers of lecturers. Now, we are lucky on this camp at UC. Lecturers are relatively well paid compared with other public universities. They have benefits, or we might attribute to the AFT that has fought for these benefits, but nevertheless the conditions are so, for example, lecturers may earn between $9,000 and $12,000 a course here. At CUNY in New York, they'll be earning $2,500 or $3,000 a course. Here, there is a little more job security. There, they are searching for one course at a time through the CUNY system. So, yeah, we are better off, but the fact of the matter is there is a two-tier system, and faculty conditions on the whole are actually getting slightly better. So faculty are, in a sense, compliant with this and are happy sometimes, or often, to see the numbers of lecturers increase. Students, of course, are more and more likely to be taught by lecturers. Now, I want to underline that these lecturers, from my experience, and I look after 15 of them in my department, are actually, many of them are superb lecturers, far better than my ladder colleagues. But it is false advertising. It is false advertising to saying that students are going to have access to the sort of the great new scholars of the universe that are to be found in the UC. All right. So this is the story. The fiscal crisis leads to searching for revenues and cutting costs. Searching for revenues and cutting costs. But it leads, I believe, to a governance crisis. To a lesser or greater extent, there is a new administrative class emerging that is concerned with the project of getting revenues. And we see that often universities think that they are not really very capable of getting revenues and cutting costs, so they bring people from outside, from the corporate world. And they bring with them corporate tactics, like the Operation Excellence that I talked about a few minutes ago. I call these people, unfairly perhaps, but nevertheless, it captures the sort of the dilemma. I call them spiralists. They spiral in from outside. They have a pet project that defines their career. They try then to spiral out, and the university is saddled with the debt and spirals down. That is an exaggeration. To some extent it has happened. I can give you examples of it happening. But this is the tendency when you actually have the imagination that you are pursuing increased revenues, lowering costs. When that is the obsession, you become like a corporation, a profit center. And what happens with that is that the administration expands. These spiralists want to create ever more people below them to establish their own presence in the university. And it's extraordinary to see the expansion of the number of associate vice-chancellors and assistant associate vice-chancellors in the administration. In the last 30 years, the administration, according to UCOP figures, the administration at our campus on Berkeley has increased fivefold. So basically there are now as many so-called senior administrators at Berkeley as there are ladder faculty, whereas before ladder faculty outnumbered them 5 to 1. As far as I can figure out from the Davis figures are better, there's only a threefold increase. But still, the administration is, as the word goes, is becoming increasingly bloated, yes. And I think there's a problem here that the administration becomes a much more directive organization and often, not always, but not often, is in very close alliance with the Senate, who also sees the world now increasingly in terms of revenues and costs. And so there is a sort of, whereas the Senate used to have perhaps more autonomy, now has perhaps less autonomy. That's why the Davis Faculty Association is very important, to have an independent voice from the Senate and from the administration. Yeah. So, I should say that faculty have not taken this line down at Berkeley. There was a faculty revolt 2 years ago, instigated by cases of three egregious cases of sexual harassment that the university chose seemingly to try and cover up. And this did incite a lot of hostility, and in the end led to the disappearance of our chancellor and provost. So there are times when actually faculty will actually assert itself against the administration, but the general trend is for the administration to increasingly expropriate control from the faculty. Which brings me to the identity crisis. I think we are moving from a university in a capitalist system, a university in a capitalist system, to a capitalist university. A university in a capitalist system of the 1950s was a university that was basically run by the faculty. It was a self-managed organization. It had some relative autonomy. Yes, it was subject to all sorts of influences from beyond, but it had some integrity and autonomy. We are now moving towards a capitalist university, one in which the university becomes essentially a profit center, in which, as I've been saying, the issue is revenues and costs. Yes. And it means, of course, increasingly that students themselves having to pay increased fees in tuition, cost of living, are themselves worried about their future, themselves are taking out loans. Again, not as high at UC than elsewhere. At Berkeley, I think it's about 50% actually don't take any loans out, and those who take loans out add up to about $17,000. So we're doing pretty well in that, as compared with other places, but nevertheless they are saddled with indebtedness when they leave the university. They are ever more placed in a precarious position when it comes to getting jobs. So there is increased precarity. So students are much more aware of their decisions they make at the university, what courses they take, what grades they will get. And they become increasingly moving from the education of citizens to the education of consumers. Which finally brings me to the legitimation crisis. As some of you may have seen in the newspapers, there's been a lot of coverage on the public opinion about universities. To what extent do they contribute something positive in the world? And it turns out amongst the Republicans and independent Republicans, the figures are that support for the university has declined over the last 3 years from 54% to 36%. The Democrats are more or less the same. Around now, about 70% are in sort of have a favorable view of the university. But it's an interesting issue why the university has to now legitimate that we can no longer take the university's existence for granted. We have been for so many years used to the idea that we don't have to justify our existence. There is now a legitimation crisis. We have to justify our existence, and this is a whole new vision we have to have of ourselves, a whole new idea, in my belief, of a university. We have to think of the public university as not just concerned with issues of access, but of issues of accountability. We have to make ourselves much more accountable to the publics we serve. We have to have a university that is engaged with the public. We have to think of the university not only bringing the public in and having greater access, but we have to think of the university as going out into the community. Now, it is true that actually this a lot of such engagement takes place, but we have to have a vision that this is of the essence of the public university. And a place like Davis has many such programs, and indeed the whole idea of the land grant was actually for the university to go out as well as the public to go in. So yes, and so finally we have to think about Sacramento. Sacramento has not always been very friendly as a whole. There are many individuals who of course have been very friendly to the UC, but not everybody. Our governor says to us, we have to be more efficient. Our governor says to us sometimes very cynically, he says, well, you know, prison security guards, they got power. If they go on strike, we're in trouble. But you university, you go on strike, nobody cares. That's a very cynical view. We have to make people care. It seems to me that we have to actually think much more seriously about Sacramento. Our lobbying activities are deeply problematic. UCOP is not accustomed to having to defend and justify the university, and the faculty association, and cook for these, the council of the council of UC faculty associations has also to make itself, I think, present in Sacramento, pointing out the contributions of the university to the economy in California. But we can only do that if we get our own house in order. There are too many scandals that come out of the university. Scandals around petty corruption, scandals around sexual harassment, and more important, scandals around the color-up of sexual harassment. And all sorts of malfeasance even in UCOP. So we have to get our own house in order if we're going to stand a chance of recovering our sort of public image. So we have to demonstrate our worth to publics and somehow, in that way, reverse the cycle of higher fees and lower state funding. And last but not least, we must support Delaine Eastin for governor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Is this loud enough for people? No. No? I'll turn it up a little bit. Thank you. So our next speaker is Amy Hines-Shaikh. She's the Higher Education Director of University Professional and Technical Employees and the Executive Director of Reclaim California Higher Education Coalition. I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am very, very appreciative of being able to appear before you today, and appreciate the COOCFA, the Council of UC Faculty Associations, and all of the co-sponsors of this event in inviting me. I sure appreciate it, and DFA, the Davis Faculty Association, of course. My name is Amy Hines-Shaikh. I'm the Higher Education Director for the Reclaim CA Higher Education Coalition. And I was hoping that I could bother somebody to be my timekeeper, because I have my remarks made in two segments, first talking about the coalition and then talking about what we're doing, most importantly, the $48 fix. If that's okay, if I could get a 10-minute mark and then 5-minute. Okay. So just to discuss what our coalition means and where we were and where we have come and where we hope to go. So first of all, the Reclaim CA Higher Education Coalition came about on October 31st of 2014, and it was in response to the three segments of public higher education feeling very siloed and segmented away from each other. So while we believe in public higher education, the community colleges were advocating solely for community colleges and just on their own track, not coordinating. The CSUs similarly, and the UCs were definitely not only siloed, I would say, within the UC, but also siloed within different segments of advocacy. So it was very siloed and disparate, just everyone floating around in the breeze and the ether, and sometimes being pit against each other fairly effectively, I might add, in Sacramento, because especially within, I call them the 4-year institutions, but increasingly they're the 5-year or 6-year institutions, the university institutions, the CSU and UC, because we do not enjoy Prop 98 guarantee funding as the K-14 system enjoys. We are every single year doing fisticuffs with every single other priority the state has to get a little bit of the general fund. And so you're walking through the halls of Sacramento doing advocacy, but you're knowing that you're walking alongside of IHSS workers who are doing in-home health supportive services that need that money, and domestic violence survivors, and and environmental protection, and just every single other thing is also coming out of the general fund. And so we're advocating for higher education, but you can see that people of conscience would also care about these other very important things. And so that made it very easy, specifically for the university systems, just to be pit against each other. And when we weren't talking, that was a pretty fun game for the folks in Sacramento to play. And they still probably try that quite frequently, but we're more increasingly able to overcome that. So prior to October 31st of 2014, everyone was siloed and separated. We had our first coalition meeting then and decided that we were going to come together with a common purpose, and that common purpose was to reclaim the master plan for higher education as it was enacted, the Donahoe Act of 1960. And so there are there are a lot of people in this room that are very well versed about the master plan in 1960, but because I work in the policy space of higher education in Sacramento, I just want to go over just the basics about it, just because it's so misused and it is used a lot to ascribe to the higher education segments things that don't even appear in it at all, that have nothing to do with it, and is very frustrating about what people say it says versus what it actually says. So I'm just going to go over that. And if you are very well versed in it, just ignore me for a little while. So it has the 3 pegs of the stool, which is accessibility, affordability, and quality. Accessibility was defined in the Donahoe Act of 1960 as 12.5% of the top 12.5% of graduating high school seniors would have a legal right to a seat in the UC system. The top 33.3% of graduating high school seniors would have a legal right to a seat at a CSU. And all who can benefit from instruction, who is everybody, would have a right to a seat at a community college. And so we're going to talk about, and Michael really laid this out perfectly, about how that vision and the enactment of that law was degraded over time. He's already kind of touched on that. I'm not going to go over it too much, but that's the way that it is written. Okay, so affordability, accessibility, and quality. So that's the access part. So affordability was supposed to be tuition and fee free, and fees were only supposed to be incidental for instruction. So the example that I like to use is you're taking a pottery class, they can charge you for the clay, but they can't charge you for the instruction, for the instructor to sit and help to mentor you in molding a pot. I don't know. I haven't taken a pottery class, but you see what I'm saying, okay? And Stan Glantz, who is the president of the Council of UC Faculty Associations, likes to say that his wife, when she was going through the nursing program, when she was taking a chemistry class, they did charge her a fee for whatever products they were using in the chemistry class, chemicals. They were using chemicals, okay, in the chemistry class. But she didn't have to pay the fee for the actual instruction, the in-classroom instruction. So that is an important difference. I'm just going to point that out to the capitalist type of university that we happen to have here. So, and then quality. So quality was defined in the master plan as being seamless through the segments. So the quality of community college classes was supposed to be as such that it was supposed to be recognized as a seamless transfer to the UC system, so you could complete, so you wouldn't just have an associate's degree, that you could have a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree, and it was supposed to be recognized. That quality was supposed to be recognized. Supposedly similar within the CSU, if you were going to have a CSU class, and then that would be seamlessly transferable to the UC. That's very, very different now. It's very contested. So we believe in all of the 3 pegs of the stool, the affordability, accessibility, and quality. It just so happens that October 31st of 2014 was right before the kickoff of the presidential contest that we had for 2016. And so we spent 2015 trying to work out the kinks of a coalition. There's a lot of egos and stuff that goes on in these large organizations that are advocates for students and for higher education. But anyway, we worked out the kinks, and in September of 2015, we had a huge strategic planning conference, and our partners came to the strategic planning conference and gave us more of a roadmap in order to actualize our goal, our mission statement of returning to the Master Plan of 1960. And so that led to a working group that was the policy paper drafting group, which is that policy paper in the back right there, the $48 fix, which was, we spent the entirety of 2016 writing it and released it on January 24th of 2017. And I want to say that when we were writing it, it seemed like the sun and the moon was ours. Everything was going great because who was going to be president? It was going to be Hillary Clinton. What was going on with the primaries? Bernie Sanders was saying that tuition and fees needed to be free, and then Hillary Clinton would try and match him and match some of his policy initiatives and policy efforts to try and show that she was going to be a good candidate for students. Who's the voice of students? Well, let's all compete to see who's going to be the voice of students. I'm going to be the voice of students. No, I am. No, I am. This is exactly the type of competition, of course, that we want, because we want everybody to say that they are going to be looking out for affordability in combination with accessibility and quality. Of course, if you have tuition and fee-free public higher education, but nobody can get in, and you're educating 12 students for free, well, hooray, congratulations to you. You just screwed over everybody, but you're giving the 12 people that have the right to be there the glorious, golden ticket, tuition and fee-free. That's not proper, right? Correct. So the same thing with quality. We could go the Khan Academy style. We could say, hey, everything's great, online education is a panacea, we're going to have free education, but everyone's just going to log on, and you're just going to do it from the comfort of your own home in your bathrobe, and everything's fine, right? No, we don't agree with that. We think that there is an intrinsic value in the exchange, the classroom exchange between students, rubbing brain cells together with each other, everybody's, collaborating, and that has intrinsic educational value. So we're not for degrading quality in order to have accessibility and affordability, and equally, we're not in favor of degrading accessibility to have affordability and quality, etc. So you see that these three things have to be protected, otherwise it's the downward spiral. I call it spiraling the toilet bowl. Michael didn't say spiraling the toilet bowl, but anyway, we don't want to spiral the toilet bowl. We don't want to degrade our higher educational institutions in the way that we have been doing it. So in order to lift us up, we got 5, okay, great. We developed and released in January of last year this policy paper. So the policy paper, I see not everybody has a copy of it in front of them. I'm a co-author along with many others. The $48 fix, Reclaiming California's Master Plan for Higher Education. And what we're attempting to do in that is, really the first 20 pages is kind of doom and gloom. It's kind of talking about the challenges that higher education faces. So there are digital copies on our website, the Reclaim cahighered.org/$48. ReclaimCAHigherEd.org. You can read the entirety of it or just the synopsis. We have an executive summary also. So the first 20 pages is a lot of doom and gloom. It's talking about what the challenges are that people love talking about. People love talking about the problems without solutions. But we do have, the last 5 pages do talk about solutions. And we investigated many different options. One of the options was, of course, the $48 fix, which is a 12.7% income tax surcharge. So that is a surcharge on the income tax that you pay, not on your income. And there's Prop 13 commercial property tax reform, estate tax, oil severance tax, financial transaction tax, and reallocating state budget savings. And I want to first talk about the $48 fix, and then I want to talk about the reason why the estate tax did not work, and that the reason why I want to highlight just that versus the oil severance tax and the others is because there is a ballot initiative being circulated for signatures that we're opposing that would tax estates at $3.5 million, and they say that it's college for all, if you've heard this. The College for All ballot initiative. It just so happens that it doesn't provide college for all in any way, shape, or form, so it's kind of disappointing. But the $48 fix being a 12.7% income tax surcharge generates enough money not only to buy down tuition and fees, but eliminates the circumstances upon which tuition and fees needed to be accelerated to begin with. So Michael talked about how in the past we had 8% of the budget, now we have 2.5% of the budget, the state budget, and that's a pretty big difference. That's a fairly big difference in the state of California in what we have access to. And so the creation of that state divestment, and I don't want to say that it's only California. It absolutely is not only California. It was a nationwide sweep just saying, you know, we want to prioritize other things. We think that higher education, there was a massive slurping sound as divestment happened out of higher education. And mostly those dollars went into incarceration, but they went to other places too. But there was just a massive, just lock people up. Where's the money going to come from? It's going to come from higher ed. So the precipitous events we also oppose as far as the incarceration surge that didn't work and is a nightmare. So, and we partner with CURB, the Californians United for a Responsible Budget, who could actually also do a whole presentation about this, and are amazing people. So first of all, the $48 fix it's called the $48 fix because it has the $48 is what the median Californian household would have to pay. If you make less than $39,000, you would pay less than $48. If you make more than $39,000 a year, you would pay more than $48. But that's the 50%. That's the median of what the Californian household would have to pay per year in order to completely eliminate all tuition and fees within the state of California and eliminate the conditions upon which they were the segments were required to start this massive student debt crisis. It's just, we need to do both things. And both of those things are expensive. It is $4.7 billion a year to reset the segments, the institutional investment, the state institutional investment to the year 2000 levels, $4.7 billion a year. And it is also $4.7 billion a year to buy out the students' tuition and fees so that the students are not privatizing what should be their public service, which is their university education. Nobody asks a third grader, why are you not putting in your share of the pie or your skin in the game? Nobody's asking that. So our fundamental position is, and is also, by the way, in the UN Declaration of Human Rights as enshrined in 1994, so we've been at this for a while. People have understood that education is a fundamental human right, and that fundamental human right does not stop at 12th grade, and that fundamental human right does not have an age, and it does not have an income. We've known that for a bit now, but we're still working on it, apparently. So we believe, okay, thank you. Just in closing, we believe that we should not think that higher education is separate than the continuation of K through 12. K through 12, everybody understands that you deserve to have a seat and you deserve to be educated. And we believe that if you can gain access to the 3 higher educational systems, and by the way, community colleges is all who can benefit from instruction, who is everybody, then that should be free for your personal enrichment and also the enrichment of all of society, because we all benefit when folks have the means and the ability to move forward. So I did pass out my business cards, and I think that I missed like a whole segment of this room because they weren't here yet. So I'm gonna pass them back, and then everybody who didn't get one, please take one. Michael spoke to our lobbying efforts in Sacramento. Our Reclaim Lobby Days we have several every year, but our big one always happens in March, and this year it is Wednesday, March 14th. If you are so inclined, I really hope that you use my business card to reach out to me to get on a lobby team, because between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. we're going to be storming the Capitol on that day, and we're going to be talking not only about this year's budget, because we always do our budget advocacy, which is just the yearly fight that we have to engage in, but we're also going to be talking about these long-range issues and engaging with lawmakers. So I hope that you come, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
And I do highly recommend you go to lobby at the state capitol. It's a lot of fun and very educational. So I want to bring up Delaine Eastin. She's a former California Assembly member. She's former superintendent of California Public Instruction, I also want to say, I think you're a UC Davis student.
I am.
She was
I'm a graduate.
She's an alumni of UC Davis, and very importantly, she's a candidate for governor of California.
Thank you very much. Yes, I know the bossy cow, so thank you all very much. A special thank you to my wonderful previous speakers, Amy, and to Michael. Thank you for laying the groundwork so very well. I will say to all of you, it always warms my heart to come here to Davis because it really was the school I went to. And I came here sight unseen in the back seat of a Studebaker. My parents were not college educated and they didn't know to bring me to see the campus before I came here. It just didn't occur to them to drive up here and see the campus. They were not very sophisticated, but they were very generous to their daughter. And at the time I was accepted at UC Davis, it was still hard for a machinist and a sales clerk to send the daughter to college because the cost of living away from home was high. And the cost of textbooks has always been high. And having spending money was a big stretch for them. And oh, by the way, the fees were actually not so bad, $82.50 a semester. My best friend went to San Jose State. She paid $42 a semester. At that time, community colleges really were zero. And so these were people coming out of the world's greatest depression and the worst world war that had ever been fought. And yet somehow they came home to a lot of different states, but especially those who came back to California. They decided to invest in the future of this state by investing in the education of their children. I think if you think about what they did, they didn't just build great K-12 education, they built the most amazing university system the world had ever seen, plus the greatest community college system the world has ever seen. They did all of that, and they didn't have a lot of, they were going on instinct. By the way, they were also building roads, amazing California freeway system, bridges, they were building dams and hospitals, and generally they were looking to the future. And so I say to each of you, when the master plan for higher education was written in 1960, and that was the last time the higher education master plan was updated, it was 1960, Pat Brown was governor. The only thing worse is the water plan, that dates to 1957. Pat Brown was governor. So there hasn't been a lot of long-range thinking, but one of the things that happened in California was people came together with three things that have been missing a bit lately: courage, vision, and heart. They had the courage to imagine an amazing future for their children and their grandchildren. They had the vision to actually put that in a document and then to carry that document through. And then they had the heart to do so much for all of us. And I just say to you, I don't know exactly where along the way we stopped dreaming those big dreams, but we've gotten somewhat timid compared to where they were. I will just say to each of you, if you remember nothing else I say today, remember, budgets are statements of values. So if you look at the budget of a family, a community, a state, what you're looking at is a statement of values. So I'm horrified to tell you that this afternoon we are 41st in per pupil spending and number 1 in per prisoner expenditure. If budgets are statements of values, what does that tell you? I have not met a single person in California that thinks that's their values. And yet somehow that's how we managed to forge our budget most recently. I will say that, remember always, that the Silicon Valley was not born here because of a confluence in rivers. We have no Tigris, we have no Euphrates. We had a confluence of educational opportunities, and that's why the Silicon Valley was born in Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and in the Bay Area generally. It was a confluence of educational opportunities. It was UC Berkeley, it was Stanford, it was San Jose State and San Francisco State, and University of Santa Clara and University of San Francisco and UCSF as well. And when you look today at what our students are doing, I have a young woman who I'm a mentor to. She's a Riverside Community College graduate, 2 years at Riverside Community College, 2 years at Berkeley, 3 years at UCLA Law School. Her debt is $248,000. She went to all public institutions. She graduated in 4 years as an undergraduate, 3 years from UCLA Law, and her debt is $248,000. She and her husband recently had a baby. They're living in Oakland, California in a 1-bedroom apartment, and they will soon be paying the same for child care for that baby as they pay for their rent. The likelihood is not good that they will move out of that 1-bedroom apartment in the foreseeable future. I will just say, when you look at people born in the 40s and 50s, they had a 90% chance of doing better financially than their own parents. Today's millennials, who are better educated than the generation in the 40s and 50s, has only a 50% chance of doing better than their parents. That is a disgrace. And so I will just say that, by the way, Germany gets it. They give free tuition to anyone who can attend their colleges and universities, including American kids who speak German. So they understand the value added of giving people educations. And we used to understand, I don't know how we got the amnesia, but we must fundamentally make college tuition free again. And I can't say enough about the $48 fix. It is really putting substantively down on paper what it takes for us to do this for every student in California. You know, when I was a kid, I actually went to my dad and I said, why isn't it more to go to UC? Because I knew, I grew up on the peninsula, so I knew that Stanford cost. Why was it so reasonable? My dad said, the machinist now, he said, well, the theory is that you'll go on and get a great education. And you'll have a better job because you got a great education. You'll make more money and you'll pay more taxes. Or at least you'll be a better citizen. And so I think he was astute and right. And I will just tell you, right now we must have absolutely a focused approach to education at all levels. Do not let higher ed fight among itself. Do not let higher ed fight with K-12, and do not let K-12 and higher ed fight with preschool and child development. We are all in this together, because the steepest curve of learning is 0 to 5. So of course we should have preschool for all. Every European and Asian country in the first world has preschool for all. Of course we ought to be investing in K-12 education. Did you know that 15 states have mandatory kindergarten? California is not one of those states. We need to have mandatory full-day kindergarten. And of course we need to move from the bottom 10 of the 50 states in per pupil spending to the top 10 of the 50 states in K-12. And then we must reinvest in higher education, including the $48 fix. And I say to each and every one of you that, yes, I thought it was interesting that Jerry wanted to do online community colleges, but guess what? Most of our community colleges are already online. So maybe we could organize them to be a little more collaborative, but we don't need to do that over again. That's already being done. But we do, in fact, need to build some more campuses. Do you know that since 1985, we built 1 UC campus? We built only 3 CSUs and only 9 campuses of the community college. Do the math. 13, right? In that same period of time, we built 23 prisons in the state of California. Who thinks those are their values? They're not mine. And so it's time for us to understand, if we educate them, we won't have to incarcerate them. The best crime prevention program in the state is education. Always has been, always will be. Furthermore, when you look at this state, we actually ought to be building more rural campuses in California. I have been all 58 counties visiting schools, and I met so many people who were educators who said, you know, our kids don't go away to college, it's just too far. It's just too hard. We need to do more community colleges here, and I want to give a shout out to Coastline Community College in Orange County, because they're doing online classes up in Amador County, which is one of the counties that doesn't have any college. And so it is possible to do online. Jerry's not wrong about that. It's just that we don't need a new campus. We need to expand the ones we've got and build some new ones. Also, let's just say, the next Silicon Valley could, in fact, be up near Redding or over by Twain Harte or down in the Central Valley somewhere. We can do this, but we do have to understand we have to make an investment in education. And I'm talking about the future. I'm talking about, yes, prenatal care. I'm talking about paid maternity leave. I'm talking about increased child development options. And I'm talking about offering universal preschool so that California looks more like the first world and less like the third world. But when I say that to you, I also want you to know that I think we must understand that we need to tell our kids that we have their backs and that we are going to support their education. Since the year 2000, state spending per student went down 39%. That is outrageous. And in fact, we didn't get poor, but since the year 2000, we had a recession, yeah. But in that same period of time, when the state's contribution to CSU and UC went down 39%, tuition and fees have skyrocketed to offset the $57 billion cuts that have been taken away from higher education. So you have to understand that we're now spending less for college students than we spend for third graders. And that was not who we were when we became the richest state in the richest country on earth. So we have to see the share of the state budget go up when it comes to higher ed. We used to spend 18% of the state budget on higher ed. Now it's down below 12%. By the way, we spent 3% on prisons. It's up above 9%. It's almost a one-for-one dollar transfer from higher ed to prisons. And so I say to each of you, we must invest in our students, and we must have a conversation about how we're going to get that money. I will just tell you the elephant in the room is called Prop 13. Commercial industrial properties was not envisioned, they would not be reassessed. The assumption was when 50% of the stock turned over, that was considered an ownership change, that the property would be reassessed. But somehow the Board of Equalization ruled they weren't going to do that. So now Disneyland pays what they paid in 1978. So over in Richmond, Chevron should have paid another $100 million into the community of Richmond. Over half of that should have gone to the schools. Imagine how much better the schools of Richmond would be today if they'd gotten another $100 million. And I say to each of you that when we look at the future, we must look at the investment that we make as if it is determining the future of our state and our nation. And I will say to all of you, I love STEM. I was on the Chancellor's Women in STEM board here at Davis, but I also love the arts. I love the whole kit and caboodle. Yes, we have to have English, but it's when you learn to write that you learn to think. Yes, we need to emphasize the whole panoply of subjects. And you know what, some of these kids that study to be mathematicians, they may let their folks down and become composers like Bach. You know, these things happen. But the reality is that all children need to become lifelong learners because 80% of the jobs in 2030 have not been invented yet. So we've got to make sure our kids are nimble and able to learn and able to make the changes that are required as the society changes. You know, when Kennedy called for us to go to the moon by the end of the decade in the 60s, most of you weren't born and you don't realize that Kennedy was ridiculed. People made fun of him. They said, "Oh, Mr. President, that's too ambitious a schedule. The moon by the end of the decade? Oh, Mr. President, that's too expensive. Oh, Mr. President, it's too hard." And Kennedy said this, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our enemies and energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are willing to postpone, we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too." Kennedy died before we went to the moon, but we did go before the end of that decade because he had courage, vision, and heart. The $48 fix, it's a well-researched report that shows we can't afford to send our students to top quality public higher education institutions and colleges tuition-free. And that was what was meant by the master plan that is now 6 decades old almost. I tell you, I demand that we return our higher education system to be tuition-free, but I also want to make sure K-12 is stunningly wonderful, the best in the country. The preschool and child development are second to none. And if we did that, if we put higher ed and K-12 and preschool together, it would be the difference between me giving you 20 pencils one at a time or giving you 20 pencils together. You see, everybody in this room could break those 20 pencils one at a time. But the strongest man or woman in this room can't break those 20 pencils if they're together. We need to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, for education as the single most important thing that California can do. in order to thrive. And guess what? That's because it is. The time has come for educators to lock arms for all of education, from preschool to graduate school, I like to say from cradle to career. We should look at our competitor nations in Europe and Asia, most invested in preschool and child development, as well as in K-12 and higher ed. They were inspired by the United States of America, especially by California. So let's return to our core values. Let's do this. Let's work on a beautiful future for each and every child in the great state of California. Thank you all very much.